Turkey is a NATO member, yet you don't have F-35s. Israel is not a NATO member that they have F-35s. What do you do with those systems? Do you keep them? Do you provide them to Ukraine, which I'm sure the US would love? Do you sell them back to Russia? It's a very complex web, but militarily a very important conundrum that Turkey is facing.
I mean, let's start with your last point. The F-35 acquisition of Turkey will recalibrate Turkey's military power, especially its air superiority in the region. Yes, Turkey is a really powerful country in terms of its military capability, but in terms of the air superiority, Turkey, has sort of problems because of the technical capacity of its air forces. Yes, it's still the number one in the region. So the region is really under a military transformation as well. And many countries in the region are investing its own military power. It will take time, to produce your own engine for your own fighter jets. I think it's not easy.
I want to start by talking about the latest developments with Trump's peace plan for Gaza. Have you looked into the details? I want to get your initial thoughts, because obviously Turkey is playing a bigger, and we're going to talk about Turkey's role in the Middle East, because it's just fascinating the way President Erdogan is kind of balancing his position, Turkey's position, which is geographically very important, between that ever-growing split between the East and the West, Russia and the US, and now China as well. And the uncertainty that we're seeing in the Middle East, or turmoil we're seeing in the Middle East. So we're going to talk about that in a while. But I think your opinion, as someone that plays a key role in setting the country's foreign policy, on the peace plan that Trump has proposed, which I think Turkey's already agreed to, and what you think Hamas's response would be. Because I also want to add another point, is that I think Hamas has representatives in Doha, in Qatar, in Egypt, and in Turkey.
Yeah. I read the plan, and we can, of course, talk about the plan and how Turkey is thinking about the plan and what will be the ramifications of the plan. Is it feasible? So we can talk about it.
Yeah, we can start now. We're starting. I'll start very casually, unlike news networks. So I'd love to get. Yeah, we can. But I was going through the plan, Murat, just on the flight. I was flying to Dubai today. Just landed a few hours ago, and I was going through the plan, and I'm just worried Hamas may not accept, because it's a pretty strict plan. There's not much leeway for Hamas. They did not give a win for Hamas or Palestinians. There's no beyond just letting the aid in and essentially not ethnic cleansing Gaza.
Yes,
which should be kind of the norm under international law. There's nothing else that Palestinians are getting from this. But we'd love to get your thoughts.
Of course, after years of almost 2 years after the Israeli attack started against Gaza, and as you know, Israel has been heavily committing, for me, is a genocide in Gaza, and now Israel is trying to destroy the Gaza, and of course is trying to enforce the people to leave from Gaza. So I think the main point that we have to take into consideration is under what condition that now we are talking about this plan, the peace plan. So-called peace plan. So number one, of course, what we need now, first of all, is to stop the war as soon as possible, because since the October 7th, the Middle East has been under significant transformation. And Israel has been attacking several countries. From Lebanon to Qatar, from Syria to Yemen. So this Israeli aggressiveness, I think, is undermining very very traditional nature of the Middle East security order. I think therefore it's a big risk for every country in the region. And of course, as you know, Turkey has been clearly explaining its position that this war should be stopped as soon as possible, because it will, cause the regional instability. It will cause a regional conflict among the many countries. So therefore, under this condition, I think the plan is really important in terms of timing and in terms of what the plan can bring to the Palestinian. So from the international legal perspective, I have many concerns that this plan will sort of facilitate the two-state solution, while Israel is strongly against the two-state solution. When we look at the Israeli politics, when we look at the Prime Minister Netanyahu's explanation in United Nations General Assembly, and when he back to the country, he was still saying that two-state solution is not possible for the future of, Palestinian issue. So under these circumstances, I'm not sure that this peace plan will bring a peace for the Palestinian issue, especially in terms of the international legal perspective, based on the 1967 border between Israel and Palestine, and the other aspect of the international legal perspective. This plan, I think, doesn't say anything about the future of Palestinian problem. In terms of the root causes of the conflict, again, I mean, this plan does not say anything how the peace plan and the future implementation of this peace plan will bring a solution to the problems on the ground. Of course, there are, sort of opportunities. Number one opportunities is, first of all, if this plan will be accepted by Hamas and publicly accepted by Israel, the war is going to end. I think this is really important because it is a genocide, right? Israel is killing everyone daily base. So we have to stop this war. If this plan stops this war, yes, it's good. But in terms of the future of Hamas, again, I mean, the plan is talking about the de-radicalization of Gaza. But what do we mean by the de-radicalization of Gaza? The radicalization of Hamas was de-radicalization of the entire Gaza population. So why we assume that we have to de-radicalize Gaza? So I think it needs to be clarified, and especially in terms of the international peace forces, for example, which is another important and strategic aspect of this plan. How many countries will send their peace troops to sort of, implement the peace plan? What will be the security guarantee for Gazan people and Hamas, or other, the dimensions of the conflict? What is the guarantee? What is the strategic guarantee for international community if Israel takes another actions, military actions, while the international troops will be located there? So there are opportunities, but at the same time, there are risks for the plan. So the implementation phase, I think, is really important and it's key. When we look at the regional perspective, many countries, including Turkey, now are supporting the peace plan because their main priority is to stop the war. But after the implementation process, I think we will see some sort of clarity. So the United States position is important. The Trump, I think, is serious in terms of implementing this plan. Otherwise, we don't have any other alternative. Yes, theoretically, we have alternatives, but when it comes to the operationalization, the realization of the other alternatives, unfortunately, we don't have, any future projections in terms of how regional actors are going to involve if this plan will not work. So therefore, I mean, this plan gives us sort of opportunity, but at the same time has a lot of risks. And I personally have concerns.
I'll tell you my concerns is there's an interview that the former U.S. State Department spokesman Matt Miller did with Channel 13. I'm sure you've seen it. And he's pretty much admitted that Israel was the one not seeking peace. Israel was the one trying to sabotage peace efforts. And he essentially said that the U.S. seems to want peace more than Israel. Now, if you take that, and he's given examples of how Israel's done that. And if you, I was going to say, like, if you include the Qatar strike, for example, that was right after Trump proposed a peace plan, and Hamas was contemplating that plan along with Qatar, who were urging them to accept the plan, and then Israel strikes Hamas negotiators in Qatar. So my concern is, if you've got this plan that essentially asks Hamas to disarm, I think is within 72 hours, not much concessions from Israel. There's no timelines or milestones or even accountability. If Israel does not withdraw from Gaza, when should they withdraw? What happens if they don't withdraw? What happens to border control? What about reconstruction efforts? And then if those goals are not met, Hamas has been disarmed. And then there's a new government, a technocratic government that is not elected by Palestinians. If you put all those together, my question is like, one is, why would Hamas trust Israel that they will, go ahead with this plan? That's number one. And I think you share those concerns based on your reaction. And number two is like, why would Palestinians accept that government that they haven't elected?
Of course, I mean, nobody trusts in Israel, because Israel has a different priorities. And when we look at the Israel's main strategy after the October 7, I mean, Israel has been radicalizing its overall strategy. I mean, even we don't know anything about where is the Israeli border. I mean, in terms of the internationally recognized border. So there are a lot of discussion here. I mean, someone is, for example, in the region may easily talk about the project of Greater Israel. So in terms of the Israelis' sort of commitment to the international law, there is a lack of trust there. In terms of the Israeli commitments on diplomacy, there is a huge lack of trust, because while the Hamas was, discussing the negotiation plan, the ceasefire plan in Qatar, Israel targeted Hamas officials in Qatar. It is, I mean, there is no grounds. There is no rationality behind this policy. So therefore, I strongly argue that now Israel is losing its rationality everything. So therefore, it is really normal. It's acceptable that Hamas doesn't trust Israel or Palestinian doesn't trust Israel, because there are many unknowns. We know that there are a lot of unknowns in terms of the implementations of this plan. So what will be the United States' role, especially the President Trump's role, in terms of pushing or enforcing Israel, you should do this and you should do that? So there is no clarity there. There is no guarantee there. So Israel can use every single pieces of opportunity to undermine the ceasefire, because Israel doesn't interest in the peace in Gaza. There was interested in any two-state solution, because Israel is losing its rationality. So therefore, it is right for the Palestinian not to trust this plan anymore. So therefore, we need an international body. I mean, to really and strongly say something what Israel should do. What will be the guarantee? What will be the security guarantee? Which is important. I mean, for example, the return of the people who already left from Gaza because of the war, so they can easily return. But still, we don't have any sort of strategic roadmap for the reconstruction of Gaza. I mean, when you look at the Gaza now, 90% of Gaza was already destroyed.
It's insane.
So how many years we need to rebuild Gaza? Which country or to which group of country? Is it going to be United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, other Muslim countries, or the Western countries? What do they talk about? How many, $1 billion do we need to reconstruct Gaza? And who is going to fund this? World Bank, IMF? So there are a lot of unknowns. So therefore, I mean, the main problem is the lack of trust. Lack of trust between the actors.
I agree. And talking about trust, I think Turkey is playing an increasingly vocal role in the Middle East, actually in global politics, to be honest. And we're going to talk about Turkish relations with China, with Russia, with Ukraine. Like, you've got relationships as a country with pretty much all parties, which makes you, makes you a good mediator between all these parties as well. But there's one point of concern that a lot of people are talking about, and that's Turkey's been the most vocal against Israel, condemning Israel. You've got Prime Minister Netanyahu recognizing the Armenian genocide as well, which President Erdogan was not too happy with. And it's escalating further. There's been reports that Israel has struck Turkish surveillance systems in Syria. Obviously, Turkey has not confirmed that, so we're not sure if it's true or not. But these are allegations by Israel. And then you've also got the Israeli air defense system that's being installed in Cyprus, which obviously is, very close to Turkey, and there's a long history there that we won't get into. And last time that Cyprus tried to install a defense system, I think it was the S-300, the Russian system, Turkey was pretty upset, and there were threats made, and that system was not installed. Now an Israeli air defense system is being installed very close to your borders. What do you make of that tension between Israel and Turkey? And if you can comment on all these different examples that are provided, including the rhetoric between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Erdogan.
I mean, there are a lot of new dynamics in the relationship between Israel and Turkey. I mean, there has been ups and downs over the course of history, especially when we look at the last 10 decades. Just imagine before the October the 7th, there was a sort of peace process between Houthis and Saudi Arabia, and there was a rapprochement process between Turkey and Syria, and there was even a rapprochement normalization process between Turkey and Israel. So the probably Netanyahu was planning to visit Turkey after 2 years and 3 years of heavy rhetoric which has been used by two sides. So and after the one day, or actually 1 hour after the October the 7th, 6:30, everything has changed, and I think everything has failed in the region. Now there are new dynamics between Israel and Turkey. Number one, of course, historically, the Palestinian issue has been always epicenter in the relationship between Turkey and Israel. And Turkey has been really supportive to establishment and just peace and Palestinian state with reference to the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And Turkey has been always criticizing Israel in terms of its military involvement into the West Bank, Gaza, and other, part of the Palestinian. So Turkey has been really criticizing Israel. But in the last decade, I think there has been new dynamics, especially the regional dynamics, because of the developments within the context of Arab uprising. But after the October 7th, now we have new realities between two countries. Syria, I think, is number one. As you know, after the fall of Assad regime, Turkey has been really eager to support the transitional period in Syria. Turkey, of course, has been strongly supporting the opposition groups before the fall of Assad regime. And in the post-Assad era, Turkey was the only country in the region that could deliver what Syria needs in terms of its, sustainable stability, political order, and security order. But because of the Turkey's involvement and because of Turkey's strategic leverage in Syria, Israel saw the new opportunity in the lack of central authority in Syria. And Israel perceived Turkey as a threat because the more Turkey's engagement in Syria, and Turkey will get more in terms of strategic gain. Of course, Turkey has been really supportive of the other countries, especially the regional countries' involvement into the new reconstruction and post-conflict Syrian process. But as you remember, Turkey's ambassador to Ankara was mentioning that Israel does not want a strong Syria. So Turkey, I think, is the critical country in terms of establishing a strong Syria. Now, Syria, I think Israel and Turkey has different priorities in Syria. This is number one. I think this is really important because it means that there would be a potential conflict of interest, even direct military conflict between Turkey and Israel, if Israel continues its sort of role to undermine the Syrian sovereignty. So this is the new reality, I think.
Okay, I want to press on that. That's actually really interesting. So I spoke to Tom Barak, who I know President Erdogan speaks to, and you probably speak to on a regular basis. And I asked him that question because I'm trying to understand, does Israel really want a weak Syria, a weak Lebanon, or they want normalizations with those countries like they had with Jordan and Egypt? Jordan and Egypt, which are, they receive a lot of military aid from the US, and that happened after they normalized relations with Israel. So I'm like, is Syria and Lebanon going to head down the similar path to those countries? And he seemed optimistic that Israel wants to normalize relations with those countries. Now, many people have the concerns of Greater Israel, which includes territory in Lebanon and Syria. Do you think Israel genuinely wants a weaker Syria, or they don't mind Syria to start to flourish as long as the risks, the defense risks that Israel faces on that border is mitigated or resolved? And number two, if there's that conflict of interest, if what you're saying, and you kind of implied that Israel wants a weaker Syria, if that's the case, what could happen? Like if Turkey's looking to strengthen Syria, and you guys are working with President Shalani, President Shara, very actively in achieving that. If Israel trying to do the opposite, what could that lead to?
I mean, that's the main question, of course, that we are trying to answer here in Turkey. What will be the potential scenarios between Turkey and Israel if they cannot, agree over these certain points about the future of Syria? This is a really important concern here in Turkey. Of course, Syria has also the same concern. But I think I can see the same concern in Syria is Israel, because Israel doesn't want to fight with Turkey. Israel doesn't want to clash with Turkey in Syria because Turkey is a different country. It's not comparable with Iran. It's not comparable with Syria and other Gulf countries. Turkey is a NATO member. Turkey is the second largest, army within the NATO's military concept. Turkey is militarily ready. Turkey's military readiness is really high. Turkey's societal support is really strong. So therefore, Israel, I think, has also concerns, and they are trying to avoid conflict with Turkey. But the main problem is, yes, Israel doesn't want a strong neighbors. I mean, this is an historical doctrine of Israel. It's part of its strategic culture.
Well, what about Jordan and Egypt? What about Jordan and Egypt, Murat?
Yeah, I mean, Egypt is a really strong country, but I mean, Jordan, yes, it's in sort of there are different agreements between Israel and Jordan. I mean, as you know, Jordan has played vital role while the protecting of Israeli airspace, sort of to prevent the Iranian missile attacks against Israel during the 12 days wars. So I mean, do you see what I mean? Yes, they don't have the same perception about the region, but one way or another, one reason or another, they have to communicate. They have to work together. So Egypt is gradually changing its position vis-a-vis Israel. We have to accept this. The region is changing because no one, I think, likes what Israel is doing, what Israel is trying to do in our region. When it comes to the Israelis' perception about the weak neighbors. So this is, I think, the part of the Israeli strategic culture. But it's again, it's an irrational policy. If Syria is going to be a strong state, it will be benefit for Israel. If Turkey will work a lot to stabilize Syria with the contribution of other neighboring countries, it will be benefit for Israel, because it will be a secure Syria. It will be a stable Syria. But Israel, I think, does not want to see the potential competitors in its close, neighborhoods. So therefore, I think if there will be sort of a continuation of disagreements between Turkey and Israel, I'm afraid that we can see intensification of this rivalry in the region. Now it's a competition period. Both countries are rivalries against each other, but Syria is an existential issue for Turkey. It's not about Israel. It's about the entire stability. Turkey, I think, perceived from a very holistic perspective. There is a YPG issue there. While Turkey is now leading its own peace process inside Turkey, at the same time, Turkey has to also concern what's going to be in terms of the agreements between the central government in Damascus and YPG. So this is also important. So we know that there is also other threats in Syria, like ISIS. Daesh.
They're getting a lot of they're getting a lot of traction now. I saw news yesterday that they're starting to advance.
We have to focus all these, the grievances, all these. So therefore, the normalization is important, but not under the sort of priorities of Israel. Israel wants normalization only under its own conditions. You can normalize your relations. For example, we really were eager to speak about the normalization before the October 7th, right? Normalization under the context of Abraham Accords. But many countries, I think, in the region, including United States, Israel itself, ignored the very, the realities about the grievances. So there was a gap between the root causes and the normalizations. Because without solving the real problems of the region, the normalization doesn't work. That's the main problem. Solve the Palestinian problem and create a stable region and get a normalization process. Maybe many countries, including Saudi Arabia, will approach to you if you easily solve the Palestinian problem. But without solving any problem, so let's make a deal.
Let's
A win-win strategic
let's.
perception.
You've talked about Israel not wanting a war with Turkey as probably the most powerful military in the Middle East. But what do you make of first Trump's meeting with President Erdogan, and more importantly, the potential for F-35s and I think F-10s to be sold to Turkey? For anyone that doesn't know, maybe historically, that Turkey's been seeking F-35s for a long time. Now, these are very strategically important from a tech perspective for the US. Now, what Turkey did is they bought the S-300, so S-400 systems from Russia. Exactly. That was many years ago in 2019. And then when that happened, the US was not too happy, and there was this a military concern is that the S-400s being present in Turkey could then get a lot. And if you've got F-35s as well, then the S-400s could be able to learn a lot about the technology behind the technical capabilities of the F-35s, the stealth capabilities of the F-35s, and that removes the edge that the US has. So that's been an issue for a very long time, and it goes back even beyond 2019, and Turkey seeking those F-35s that Israel has. It's a very important point, which is really weird. That Turkey is a NATO member, yet you don't have F-35s. Israel is not a NATO member, that they have F-35s. I'd love you to explain that. But how important is that for Turkey, number one? Number two is, how do you balance that? Because you've still got the S-400 systems. What do you do with those systems? Do you keep them? Do you provide them to Ukraine, which I'm sure the US would love? Do you sell them back to Russia, which would not, the US would not be happy with? Or would you sell them to Russia? Then Russia could then sell them to India, because India is looking for S-400s from Russia. It's a very complex web, but militarily a very important conundrum that Turkey is facing. So maybe can you please explain, is there a path forward for Turkey to have F-35s, maybe F-10s as well that were mentioned? And what would that mean for Turkey's military capabilities in the Middle East, which is already growing as your neighbors get weaker and weaker?
Let's start with your last point, how the F-35 acquisition of Turkey would recalibrate Turkey's military power, especially its air superiority in the region. Yes, Turkey is a really powerful country in terms of its military capability, but in terms of their superiority, Turkey, has sort of problems because of the sort of the technical capacity of its air forces. Yes, it's still the number one in the region. Maybe Israel has also same military capacity in terms of air power capability, but it helps a lot under the regional uncertainty, because now there is a war in Ukraine, and there was a war between Israel and Iran, and of course there are still possibilities a sort of military conflict clash between Iran and Israel. So the region is really under a military transformation as well. And many countries in the region are investing its own military power. So I don't know how the ends will be look like in terms of the arms race in our region. So therefore, it's really important for Turkey to invest and to upgrade its air power. So F-35, I think, will key for Turkey's military projection. But it's not limited with F-35. Of course, Turkey has also its own indigenous national project, which is titled as Kaan. Kaan, I think, will recalibrate Turkey's air power, but Turkey needs time. It will take time, to produce your own engine for your own fighter jets. I think it's not easy. It was not easy for China, for example, after 30 years of research and development projects. So therefore, Turkey's own project Kaan will take time to develop its own engine. But it will help a lot to improve Turkey's military capacity under the regional and international dynamics. But F-35 is a big problem between two countries. I mean, of course, there is a legal aspect of this program because Gaza is an important legal framework that at the same time constrain what presidents can do. It needs to be done something different in terms of including President Trump. I think if he has a crystal clear idea about the revitalization, the relationship between Turkey and United States, President Trump has an option to write a report that's acquisition of F-35 from Turkey will be key national interest for United States, including United States national interest in our region. So he has to write a report to the Congress that eventually Congress might change its overall perception about Turkey's exclusion from the F-35 project.
Would you be able to? By the way, it's F-35s and F-16s. I misspoke earlier, but would you be
Yeah, no
able
problem.
would you be able to get F-35s while keeping the Russian S-400 systems?
Yeah, there is a technical discussion here, but I think at this stage it's not going to be difficult for Turkey to separate and use S-400 as standalone system. There are also other alternatives for Turkey not to use S-400s. Turkey may choose S-400 as inoperable. Okay, Turkey has a lot of alternatives not to use S-400. So if you don't use S-400, so it's not going to be a problem. It's not going to be a technical problem. S-400 cannot intercept what F-35, technical sort of details. So this is the main concern of United States. Of course, Gaza is developed for Russia to deter Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And it was the main reason for United States. But now I think there is one option that Turkey can get F-35. It has already paid approximately $1.4 billion, and Trump can easily decide about this, and then Turkey can continue to procure F-35 because according to the original plan, Turkey wanted to procure 100 F-35.
That would make Turkey a massive military in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the strategic landscape, the defense landscape in the region, even, I mean, in terms of the portfolio of the Lockheed Martin that can, sell the F-35 to the other countries, Turkey is the number one in terms of its, strategic planning. So therefore, but now another problem I think is how about Turkey's return to F-36 program? That's the main issue because Turkey was excluded from the program. But now United States, of course, the Trump administration will be really happy. But I am not sure how the Congress and other institutions in United States can decide about Turkey's return to F-35 program.
They were already not happy. I think they sent a letter to Hegseth and Rubio not long after the meeting.
Yeah.
But let's go back to what that means for Turkey, because everyone loves to talk about India, how they're the silent winner in all the geopolitical tension we're seeing. China's obviously become a new superpower. Russia's weakened by Ukraine. Ukraine is facing a war. Israel has spread very thin across all these countries. They've done really well. Iran has been significantly weakened. Saudis and Europe. So these two regions are the Middle East. A lot of Arab countries in Europe are starting to increase their defense spending. Saudi has that pact with Pakistan. Can you maybe explain two things? Number one is, what is Turkey's position in the world now as Russia's been weakened, the Middle East is in turmoil, and Turkey's able to maintain a good relations with all parties involved in all these different wars and arms races? And number two, what do you make of the European rearmament we're seeing, especially what we would expect to see after a Ukraine war ends? So these are two-part questions: Turkey's role in the world and the new Europe post-Ukraine.
I think Turkey's role in the world is also changing. I think this is really important because under the circumstances of global uncertainty for the countries like Turkey, it's really difficult to recalculate and redesign its overall grand strategic perspective. But number one priority for Turkey is to fix the problem of international order. I mean, this order was created after the Second World War based on the international law, which we call it as rule-based international order. But unfortunately, the international order doesn't work very well. The international global governance doesn't work well. United Nations, as you can see, and other international institutions, even Trump himself was criticizing United Nations while he was speaking at the United Nations General Assembly. So it doesn't work. It doesn't represent the real balance of power international relations. It doesn't have any transparency, right? And it also is losing its functionality. Why United Nations cannot bring a solution, cannot stop Israeli genocide in Gaza. So therefore, we are losing the legitimacy of international systems. So therefore, number one priority for Turkey is to support the reform in the United Nations system. Number two, in terms of Turkish foreign policy objective, yes, Turkey is a middle power, but at the same time, it is beyond the middle power. No middle power like Turkey doesn't have any military base in different, geography, different continent, in North Africa, in the Horn of Africa. No country like Turkey can, organize simultaneous military operation to deter non-state armed actors and other competitors. So therefore, Turkey is beyond military power. Turkey wants to, I think, consolidate its middle power, of course, status, but at the same time, Turkey wants to play a global actor in this role. This is important, contributing to the international order. So number three, Turkey wants a multipolar world, right? Because the unipolarity didn't work. And now we are entering a new era in terms of multipolarity. What we need in this multipolarity to, enlarge your geopolitical portfolio. Turkey has an Asia New initiative, which is really focusing on Turkey's relations, economic, diplomatic relations. And Turkey has an Africa opening. It was a new strategy. Now Turkey is a really active player. Turkey is really prioritizing its economic relations with different countries. Turkey wants to improve its relations with the global south. But of course, Turkey wants to consolidate its strategic autonomy. If your allies does not support you, so you have to solve your own problem with your own capacity. We saw in Syria. We saw in Libya. So therefore, I think Turkey invests more in its military power. Turkey, I think, will invest more in its economic power. These are the main, but it's really difficult. I mean, as a NATO member, relations with Russia is really difficult. As a NATO member, as a candidate country for the European Union, Turkey is at the same time is trying to any door of opportunity, window of opportunity with Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So
Exactly.
it's really difficult to understand Turkey's position, but Turkey has to do this.
Yeah, Turkey's, even though you're part of NATO and an EU candidate, Turkey's it's just got its own independent policy, and you've done a really good job at balancing that. You're the only NATO country to go to the SCO, the Chinese military conference, the Chinese Alliance Conference. I can't remember what it stands for.
Yeah.
And you're the only NATO member that has S-400 air defense system. So it's a very interesting position to be in. But you said something that I want to ask you further on is, do you think Turkey's independent position could lead to a separate military or economic bloc being formed independent of Russia, China, BRICS, independent of NATO?
No, I don't think so. I think because, historically, Turkey has a strong tie with the European countries. Its economy is heavily dependent on the European economy. It's more than 52. And its trajectories, I think, is part of Turkey. So you can't, define easily Turkey. So Turkey, yes, Turkey has a lot of options because of its geopolitical position. Turkey has to do this. While you have a good relations with the European countries, while you are a strategic, actors within NATO, as Turkey, because of your strategic landscape, because of your economic outreach, you have to work with Russia because of many reasons. You have to work with China because many countries are working with China now. So this is not the world that you can choose on the one block, that you can establish your own diplomatic, portfolio within the same block. It's not possible. So there is a connectivity. There is a transactionalism between the actors.
There's
I mean,
interdependence on on Russian natural gas, for example. I think it's like 40 to 50% of your natural gas. So you kind of have no choice in some cases. But in other cases, it seems very strategic, China being one example. It's like Turkey doesn't have to improve that relationship with China and lean more to the West, but you intentionally try to maintain that independence, which is
yes.
just fascinating to watch. But what do you make of the European rearmament that we're seeing as well?
Yeah. That's another critical issue, I think, in the post-Ukrainian war. So we don't know what's gonna be, what's kind of European security and defense architecture will be emerge after this war, because still the war in Ukraine is continuing. But its impact on European security and defense architecture, I think, is huge. There are three, I think, points that we have to take into consideration to understand the European rearm program. Number one, there is a lack of United States security commitments, especially when Trump came to power in the United States. He's really criticizing the European actors in terms of their contribution to NATO. He says that, look, you should work with your own capacity. I don't want to pay your money, right? So therefore, there is a sort of increasing unwillingness, which is coming from the Washington. This is really important. And this is a really weak signal for Russia to do more in Ukraine, to do more on the other part of the Eastern Europe. So
So what do you mean by that, for Russia to do more? Do you think that's incentivizing Russia to continue the war?
Yes,
Or
of course.
because
Of
US
course,
support is US.
If United States give a really weak signal to the Russia can use it immediately. So, and it will try to extend its military sphere of influence or political sphere of influence. So the number two, it's another weakness for Europe, that there are competing narratives vis-a-vis Russia. So what gonna be the European security? There are alternatives perception. In the Western Europe or UK, if of course, UK is part of Europe, but not part of European Union. But in the Western Europe, there is a different understanding. But in the Central Europe, there is another different understanding. In the Eastern Europe, Russia is an existential threat. So under these two important points, and the number three is that, yes, technologically, many European countries, France, Germany, Italy, United Kingdom, are technologically superior, but they don't have enough industrial base to produce more, to militarily support Ukraine against Russia. So, we saw during 2 years, we have been observing how the European military support to the Ukraine in the war didn't work very well. So therefore, they need also this industrial capacity. So under these three circumstances, what kind of European security order that we should build up in the upcoming future? Is it going to be a strategically autonomous Europe, which is, separating itself from NATO? It's going to be a new Europe. It's going to be a new European army. Or should we reconstruct European security by investing more on NATO? This is a too important question that we don't know the answer yet.
But what do you make of President Trump's U-turn on his policy shifts when it comes to Ukraine? Now, from criticizing Zelensky and not supporting Putin, but empathizing with Putin, to now contemplating offering Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine.
Because in the beginning, he thought that the personal relations can solve everything. I mean, he's really looking at the issues from the very individualist perspective.
Like a businessman.
This is a one style of foreign policy. Okay, it's acceptable. You can do that. But if this individualistic perspective doesn't solve the problem, you have to change your perception. You have to change your tactics and strategy. This is how President Trump realized about Putin. He believed that our good relations with Putin, if we can speak Putin, I can solve the problem. I can end the war within 24 hours. But it didn't work. And now he's recalculating its overall strategy. Because United States cannot allow Russia to win in Ukraine. That's going to be a strategic nightmare for entire Europe. That's going to be a strategic lose for United States in the competition between United States and Russia. So therefore now he knows that he has to change its strategy. So the basic for this strategy, support Ukraine militarily and continue your support militarily in Ukraine.
Do you think the Tomahawk missiles could change could they change the reality? Do you think the Tomahawk missiles could change the reality on the ground?
There is a possibility on that. Because, I mean, Russia has a lot of problems. Economic problems, so the tactical and operational problems on the ground. So therefore, Tomahawks, I think, can be a key factor in terms of at least constrain Russia within the soil of Ukraine, maybe to penetrate into the Russian soil, which will be another, risky step by the Western countries, because you can't make sure about yourself what is the reaction, what will be the reaction of Russia.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I know that war is going to have a lot of impact on Turkey's position as well. You guys have historically close relations with Crimea. I know Mustafa, I think it was Jemilev, I interviewed in Ukraine a long time ago. He's very close to President Erdogan. He's spoken about the close relations between the Tatar people and Crimea. And obviously you do have a relationship with Russia and with Ukraine. So I think you'd be in a perfect position to tell me, what are the different scenarios for the war in Ukraine? How could it end? And how would that change the geopolitical position in Europe? You kind of hinted what would lead to the European rearmament, but more importantly, how can the war end? What is a Russian win? What is a Ukrainian win? And where do you think we'll end up somewhere in the middle?
I mean, there are different scenarios. Number one for me is a good scenario that Russia can be defeated in Ukraine, which eventually will have to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. It's going to be a victory of NATO. It's going to be a victory of Europe. It's going to be victory for Ukraine. This is a good scenario. But if you ask me, it's not a most likely scenario.
Obviously, yeah.
Obviously, yeah. So the Russian victory, I don't know, because what Russia is trying to achieve, what is the strategic objective or grand strategic objective of Russia? Russia wants to, maintain its operation active and wants to turn Ukraine as a landlocked country by occupying Odessa, and then Ukraine will turn to a landlocked country, which is another nightmare for the entire European security and the security in the Black Sea region. So if you ask me the possibility of this scenario, it's not most likely scenario, but there are sort of possibilities for Russia to win at this minimum stage of war, to maintain its territorial control over 4 oblasts in this, the eastern Ukraine. So the third alternative is the continuation of war. So I think this is the most likely scenario. Because
how much longer?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the sustainability of war is different from one actor to the another actor. It needs to be a military, capacity and capability, which Russia has now. But at the same time, we have to see the decisiveness of the European actors. Russia has motivation. This is an existential project. This is a survival project for Russia. So if Russia cannot win the war, or if Russia cannot maintain its territorial control, in the eastern part of Europe, say Ukraine, then Putin will face a huge challenge. So therefore, I mean, it's a kind of, don't want to say the frozen conflict, but Ukraine will not give up, but Putin will not give up. The Western countries will not give up. So we need something, a black swan type development, a moment in Ukraine. But what is the black swan type moment? I don't know.
Are you? It could be. Is there an above? Would you say above 20% chance that Russia could resort to a tactical nuclear strike?
I mean, it's a bluff.
It's a big statement, but we're talking. I know it's a bluff. But for how long? Because we're talking about Tomahawk missiles now.
Yes.
And I spoke to people in Russia, and there's a lot of voices close to Putin that are advocating for that, not to nuke Ukraine, but to have a tactical nuclear strike somewhere in eastern Ukraine, give a warning, 48-hour warning to diminish civilian casualties. But that is a pretty big step.
That's one type moment. So so then I don't know. I mean, what gonna be the response of the United States or other Western countries? So the nuclear tactical or strategic type of nuclear weapon is really dangerous, by the way, but it can change something. But hopefully we will not see any, sort of development on this front.
I want to ask you more of a military question. What do you make of Russia's military now? Because I speak to different people. They're either pro-Russian or pro-NATO. The pro-Russian people say Russia's still a massive superpower, have a massive upper hand. They're winning on the ground. And then the pro-NATO advocates talk about the incremental advancements of Russia. Russia's losing a lot of men. Impossible to know the actual casualties. You've got access to a lot of data. Moving away from data that's confidential, what can you share about who's winning on the ground and Russia's military capabilities today prior to the war?
I think it's true that Russia is a superpower because it has a nuclear weapon. It's crystal clear. But when it comes to the military effectiveness on the ground, Russia has a lot of difficulties. Russia now is recruiting more than 1,000 men from different regions of Russia, but not from Moscow or St. Petersburg, of course. But at the same time, Russia is losing more than 1,000 soldiers on the ground daily. I mean, from a military effectiveness perspective, it doesn't work. But at the same time, Russia has ability to maintain its territorial control in Ukraine, which shows that Russia has military capacity. After the war, Russian defense industry has been working tremendously. So it has a producing capacity. It's a production capacity. This is, I think, hugely important. Ukraine war is a positional war, which means that there is an operational tempo on the ground is really high, right? In terms of using ammunitions, in terms of losing soldiers on the ground. But the geographical change is low. There is a gap between the operational tempo and the geographical change. There is no geographical change on the ground. So I think it's an interesting war because of why? I mean, this is a drone capacity is a key factor. In the beginning, what Ukraine, I think, did smartly to prevent a quick victory of Putin in Kiev because of its drone capacity, right? This is number one. But what Russia did after the 2 years of war, that Russia has been doctrinized the Iranian use of drone with its own operation in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So the war is really dynamic. The battleground is really dynamic.
And Murat, the last topic I want to ask you about is China. China's growth in all this. They seem to be one of the countries that are benefiting the most. Their northern neighbor, Russia, is being severely weakened and distracted. Their main rival, the US, is spread thin between the Middle East and Russia and running out of a lot of the military capabilities that would need to be able to deter Chinese expansion in Asia. And economically, they're doing very well. They're getting a lot of access to cheap oil from Russia. what are your thoughts on China's growth, China's military capabilities? Because again, I asked different people and I get different reports of how capable China is. Obviously, Erdogan was at the conference not long ago, which there was a military parade right after that. Would love to get your thoughts on their military capabilities, what we're seeing today, considering they're not battle tested.
Yeah. Yes, but this is really important. I mean, when you take into consideration the combat provenness and military readiness of China, we have a lot of unknowns. So, but when it comes to the rise of China, I mean, it's crystal clear. China has already risen. But the problem is, how about the competition between United States and China? The problem is, can China rise peacefully? This is the main, questions that we can ask to ourselves, because historically the power transition has been always bloody between the great powers. China I think, seems happy. It seems happy as you describe it, while Russia has to deal with the war in Ukraine, and United States has to deal with Russia and other mess in the Middle East and other part of the world. China is now focusing its own economic capacity and military capacity. There is still gap between United States and China in terms of the power equilibrium, but it doesn't necessarily mean that China cannot pass the United States in some part of the military technology. Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
This is thing number one. China.
Energy capacity, the production of warships.
And
drone capacity.
And we saw Chinese military capacity in the last the military parades in Beijing. So therefore, I think it's still, China has still a lot of advantages, but at the same time there is a political willingness, I think, in China. This is a problem. What China really wants.
Yeah.
Does China wants to lead the international order, or China really wants to be a hegemonic state in its own hemisphere? That's the, I think, main question for China.
Have you seen the report of Russia as a think tank? Let me see what it's called. It's called the Royal United Services Institute. And they reported that apparently Russia is quietly arming or training, not only arming and training the PLA, the Chinese military, to airdrop armored vehicles and special reconnaissance capabilities to seize Taiwan by 2027. So China is preparing to seize Taiwan by 2027. Do you think Turkey's position in maintaining good relations with both the US and China is essentially hedging against a potential conflict there? And what would you say is the probability of such a conflict, and how would that look like? That will be my last question, and probably the most difficult for you, Murat.
Yeah. Of course, Turkey doesn't want to see any conflict between two superpowers. It's going to undermine the entire stability in the international system. The US is the strategic partner, but there are a lot of problems between Turkey and United States. They have to solve their problem first. They need a strategic harmony to, of course, recalibrate their strategic relationship. They need a strategic harmony.
Murat, but they need to do it with alienating Russia, which could have been a rival to China, pushing them away to China, doing the same now with India, pushing closer to China with the tariffs and the threats to China, and then doing the same thing to the Middle East with the strike in Qatar. The US, in my opinion, needs allies more than ever. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to stress that.
That's the main point I want to do, point out. Of course, you are clearly defined the United States position. And when it comes to the China should, might be a good partner for Turkey. But there are also problems between China and Turkey, especially the trade imbalance. They have to fix this problem. And how Chinese, perception towards the Middle East will look like in the upcoming future. So, of course, Turkey and China also can be a good partner, but it's not going to be a partner like the partnership between United States and Turkey, or Turkey and the European countries.
It's an interesting position to be in. Murat Yesif, that's absolute pleasure to speak to you, sir. And it's just been fascinating to see Turkey's growth in the geopolitical chess or action movie that we're seeing move on steroids. It's been just really fascinating to see. And good luck with hopefully getting peace and stability to Syria, which, in my opinion, needs it more than most other regions. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Mike.